often in newspapers, in the media, you listen, you hear, you read always about how much money has been allocated. Now, I wonder as a citizen how much of this money actually reaches. So my question now would be on the funds that have been released or are going to be released. It all sounds very impressive. And you just also ended on a quite positive note here. But these grants, they do have conditionalities attached to them, I hope. And wouldn't these conditionalities, again, limit in a certain way the subnational entities in implementing these schemes or utilizing these funds? What is your take on this issue?
We see that Finance Commission is being asked to impose certain conditionalities in order to motivate states to follow a particular line of action that the central government requires them to follow. I think the confusion arises because people start assessing the merit of specific conditions and then wonder if there is anything wrong with the Finance Commission imposing them. The question here is not whether the conditionalities are good or bad. Indeed, all of them are ostensibly good as they are focused on important reforms which must be carried out. The question is also not whether conditionalities work or not. Sometimes they don't, especially when they impose rigid targets to be met. But sometimes they do, especially when they require states to implement certain reforms, broadly speaking. The questions here are much broader than this. First of all, on the constitutional grounds, the question is whether the Commission is constitutionally empowered to recommend conditionalities, or for that matter, whether the terms of reference have the constitutional mandate to ask the Commission to suggest conditionalities that may be attached to the release of grants to states. On the operational grounds, the question is why local governments should be penalized for the acts of omission on the part of the state governments. Third, and relatedly, there is a political angle, which is that if, for instance, the local governments are controlled by a party which is in opposition to the chief minister's party, the state government may ignore difficult reforms and let the local bodies be starved of funds just to score a political point. Finally, on ethical grounds, there is a risk that imposing conditions on grants to states would become a norm. Once this happens, the probability and the potential of the central government's penetration in the state's domain in the name of conditionalities increases. This, coupled with the center's tendency to expand its own fiscal space by relying on non-shareable levies, that is cesses and surcharges, threatens to demolish the constitutional architecture of Indian fiscal federalism.
I do have a question on these cesses and surcharges as well, but let me just ask one more follow-up question. Would it also be politically instrumentalized to allocate large number of funds of which then the government, and in this case, let's say the central government, already knows that the states or even the lower subnational entities are not in the position to fulfill the targets and will not be in the position to spend the funds adequately, so that it just it sounds better, but in the end, not all of the funds that agreeably sound quite impressive will be dispersed.
Yeah, it happens because most of the states do not have the capacity to implement all the centrally sponsored schemes. And that is why I said in response to your previous question that centrally sponsored schemes are generally very, very regressive. Regressive in the sense that only those states which are rich, the states which can contribute their share toward those centrally sponsored schemes are better placed to utilize the money that the center has allocated for those schemes.